Welcome into the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast. Blaine Keller, Terry McCormick, Chris Yao here with you. Titans fall again, 37-27 to Brian Callahan's former team, the Cincinnati Bengals. And I'll start with this. There are two types of bad football teams. There's the fun kind of bad that the Titans showed against the Chargers, against the Vikings, against the Texans about a month ago. Then there's the historic kind of bad that the Titans showed on Sunday with 6 turnovers, 10 total, most since 2007. Pretty wacky game, pretty wild game, pretty ugly game, and another low point for this franchise, I feel like.
Yeah, certainly not the way that you want the season to play out, as they keep inventing ways to lose, it feels like. And certainly yesterday, if not the death knell for the Will Levis era here with the Titans, it certainly felt like a serious blow to that plan of trying to turn him into the franchise quarterback. It just feels like, and I'm sure we'll go into that more in detail throughout the podcast, but it certainly felt like that for the first time, Will Levis had lost the endorsement of Brian Callahan.
Yeah, Levis 3 interceptions and a lost fumble. And as Chris Yao was telling us before we got started here, little I told you so.
And I'm not wearing Tennessee garb to say I told you so about Will Levis. So at least one team in the state's in the playoffs this week, and so I'm sporting orange all week long. But there's a faction of this fan base who thinks that Tennessee fans are upset that the Titans drafted Will Levis because he went to Kentucky. Tennessee fans were upset that they drafted Will Levis because they watched him play at Kentucky. There's a difference. and so, Will Levis is Will Levis. And is Will Levis going to leave Tennessee and become the next Baker Mayfield? Maybe. Maybe he goes somewhere, Sam Darnold goes somewhere with a couple of great receivers and, where he can be that gunslinger that he is and become something special. Maybe he does. But he was never going to be the right quarterback for this franchise because it had so many problems. The offensive line, the receiving core, just problems everywhere. So it was never, you really needed a guy who could be a little bit more of a manager even than trying to win you ball games. You needed somebody who can give it to Tony Pollard, and that's not what they want Will Levis to do. And I think they hired the wrong coach for it. They hired the wrong coach for this franchise right now. In 3 years, Brian Callahan might be the right coach. Right now, he's not. So everything about this franchise is either 3 years behind or just completely in disarray. One of the two. I don't know.
Titans fall to 3-11. Lots to break down here. We'll take a break. And when we come back, Fox 17's Jill Jelnick joining us to break down another Titans loss. Stay tuned on the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast.
Being a part of a cooperative is being a part of something bigger. Farm Credit Mid-America is a customer-owned lender that specializes in agricultural financing for farm real estate, operating, and farm equipment. A unique benefit of being a part of the Farm Credit Mid-America Cooperative is our patronage program, which has put over $1 billion back in our customers' hands over the last 7 years. That's the power of a cooperative. Visit us at fcma.com to learn more.
I own the land.
I farm the land. Together we're farmers. This is our cooperative.
Blaine Keller, Terry McCormick, and Jill Jelnick of Fox 17 joining us today. Jill, thank you so much for your time. Just your general thoughts from the press box yesterday after watching the Titans fall to Brian Callahan's Bengals.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm always excited to talk football, and unfortunately, it hasn't been a super fun season for the Titans this year, at least not the season we hoped it would be. And I was trying to think of one word to sum up that game against the Bengals Sunday, and I think the best one is demoralizing. Gosh, I mean, especially because they started out so strong. We were all looking at each other in the press box. Even I was looking at Terry and everybody down the row, like, "Oh, hey, this is a Titans team that looks like they're moving well. They're creating turnovers." Levis looked good early, and then it was almost like we spoke too soon, because very quickly in that first half we had the collapse, and that was a result of really, I don't like to put everything on one player, but I think in this case, when you look at what happened specifically in that game, in that first half, Will Levis just started to unravel. Terry and I had a great conversation on Fox 17 News at 9 Sunday night about just, it started with one turnover, the one fumble, then the interception, then the next interception, and then he couldn't clean it up or turn things around the second half, which ultimately led to his benching. So it was frustrating watching that. And I think actually the game against the Bengals in many ways was like a microcosm of the Titans season. You saw small flashes of potential, what this team could do. And then once again, they shoot themselves in the foot, which has been their Achilles heel all season long.
Yeah, Joe, I would agree with that, and I want to get your opinion on this. But in assessing Will Levis, when you look at him as a player from a physical standpoint and all, with the arm talent and all, there's a lot to like. And I think, though, the problem that he has more than any other is maybe, people talk about, like what Chris said about him, whether he can avoid the rush or step up in the pocket and those things. But to me, the biggest thing with Will Levis is, I think his confidence ebbs and flows far too much for what you need right now out of a starting quarterback. Because you saw, like against Minnesota, he hit that 98-yard touchdown pass to Nick Westbrook-Akina, and that seemed to unlock something for him. And for the rest of that game, and then the Houston game, he pretty much played lights out. But then when things get going back the other way, when he has a mistake, when he struggles, other than overcoming the one pick six at Houston, when he's had a problem, he tries to dig himself out of it and makes a worse mistake. He's like a pitcher who, all of a sudden, he's cruising along and all of a sudden he walks somebody. Then he hits somebody. Then he walks somebody else. Pretty soon the bases are loaded and a ball's hit back to him and he throws it into right field instead of getting it out at first base. And all of a sudden the wheels have come off. I feel that way with Levis, that once things start going sideways, he's not able to keep it out of the ditch a lot of times. And I think that's what, if he's ever going to be a successful NFL quarterback, that's what he's got to learn not to do.
Terry, I love your baseball analogy, not just because we're both baseball purists, but I think the yips, right, in this case might be a good little word to describe kind of the ebbs and flows of Will Levis's confidence. And you make a really good point. The top athletes, not even the top athletes, but professional athletes, right? If in any sport, if they make it to that professional level, they are in that top 1%. And just one of the many characteristics that you have to have as a professional athlete in any sport is being able to not just maintain that confidence, but be able to pick yourself up, shake off anything negative, and continue on without carrying any negativity forward. The ebbs and flows of Will Levis's confidence has been apparent this season. You mentioned the turnovers, you mentioned the interceptions, the Vikings. I still go back to that Bears game. That was very much on display. And I think what concerns me the most about that confidence aspect of Levis is yesterday reminded me of that Bears game where things were going well. Then he took a dip, a turnover here or there, and then he really wasn't able to finish that fourth quarter of that first game strong. And we all gave him the benefit of the doubt. Oh, it was the first game of the season, a big game, a lot of jitters, right? He's still just a second-year quarterback. I'm tired of that excuse. I think I am at the point now. I'm done making excuses for Levis when it comes to, he needs to get more confidence. And I'm also done making excuses for him when it comes to he'll become a better decision maker. No, the game against the Bengals was proof to me that his decision-making skills did not improve or progress the way it needed to this season. That was the most concerning takeaway for me against the Bengals. And that was also the nail in the coffin for me in terms of deciding whether or not Levis is the quarterback of the future. I'm with you, Terry. We talked about it again on our show, Fox 17 News at 9. This is a quarterback that is not ready to be a franchise quarterback, nor should he be the quarterback of the Titans moving forward.
Levis benched in that third quarter after an interception, his fourth turnover of the game. No benefit, maybe in the last couple of games when you look in regards to this franchise of do they play Will Levis? Do they play Mason Rudolph? Brian Callahan non-committal on that post-game. Is there a benefit or a necessary action that needs to happen in these last three games in regards to that part of Levis's future? Do you think that Mason Rudolph needs to be the quarterback because of Levis's recent play, or is it does it need to be Levis trying to figure things out instead of Mason Rudolph?
Blaine, that's a great question. And that's the new big question that all of us media members are asking. Now that we basically have made our decision about Will Levis and whether or not we believe he's the quarterback for this team, do you continue to start him or do you go Mason Rudolph? Yes, you continue to start Will Levis. Here's why I think so. Because, like you said, the Titans are out of playoff contention. It would be different if they still were competing for the AFC South, if they were still in the race. Then I think you would go with Mason Rudolph because he did provide a little bit of a spark yesterday, and he could be more of a consistent quarterback that could get you more wins down the final stretch. However, Titans are out of playoff contention. These three final games don't mean anything. The goal of these three final games for Coach Callahan and his staff is to evaluate players, figure out who they want on their roster next year. Who are they going to extend? What decisions are they going to make where when it comes to personnel? And also, what are they going to do about the quarterback? So going back to your question, Blaine, is there any benefit of starting Levis? Yes, because you have to just make absolutely sure that he is not the guy for the future. Use these three games, since they're a wash, they don't mean anything, they don't count for anything. Use these three games for even more clarity to prove to the rest of your staff. Maybe Callahan has some assistants that aren't fully convinced that Will Levis is not the guy. Use the three games to convince him. Also, how about the fans? I have a feeling that majority of Titans fans are not big on Levis right now, especially after the Bengals game, but use the three games to emphatically put the decision away. Take the decision out of any question of whether or not Will Levis is the guy. Just go ahead and put that to bed, start him. And also just make sure for yourself that Levis doesn't have a complete turnaround. I think Terry and I, we alluded to it earlier. I have a hard time believing Levis all of a sudden plays his best three games of the season down the final stretch. But at this point, since you're not playing for a win, you're not playing for the playoffs, play to evaluate players, play for the future. Make sure you have it very clear in your mind what you're going to do at that quarterback position when this season is over. You can't do that if you start Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, I think, the quarterback position for 2025 is completely up in the air because, the question not only becomes, who's going to be your starter? The question is also, well, can you run it back with Will Levis even as the number two quarterback after you've tried to make a starter out of him? Or do you do like, was done with Trey Lance and Kenny Pickett and Justin Fields and, any number of guys, Zach Wilson, that have been, drafted and didn't make it at their initial stops? Do you trade him off for pennies on the dollar? I mean, that's what the Titans did with Malik Willis last year or earlier this year, I should say. So, to me, there are so many questions. And with this team, with it being a weak quarterback draft, after so the draft picks are saying only Shedeur Sanders, maybe Cam Ward are worthy of top 5 picks. There's no guarantee the Titans are even going to get in the top 5 because there are about 10 teams right now that have like 4 wins or less. So I don't see the Giants or Raiders challenging to win another game anytime soon. And they're both ahead of you in the draft position and both, needing a quarterback themselves. You could go out maybe and spend a boatload of money on another bridge quarterback, like Sam Darnold, some people have talked about. But honestly, let's look at it. Is Sam Darnold taking this team to the playoffs right now the way this roster is? He's more likely to go back to being Jets Sam Darnold the way this roster is. Patrick Mahomes could take this team to the playoffs the way this roster is constructed right now. This is a long, hard rebuild that the Titans are going to have to go through, and whether Will Levis is involved in that or not involved in that, so there are more things to figure out for the team other than the quarterback until it's ready to contend again.
Jill Jelnick, any closing thoughts from the Titans-Bengals game? Any notes on Tavondre Sweat's big run? Probably the highlight of the season there for those of us watching in the press box.
Yeah, that was fun. And I don't think we've heard the crowd get that excited in at least, the last 5 to 6 home games. I think that was a really fun moment. Love that for him. And I think my final thought would be, I still, we're a lot of our discussion is surrounding Will Levis, and rightfully so. But, I think the other big picture is this is Brian Callahan's first year. How much of this do we put on him, who was brought in and was hired largely because of his work with quarterbacks, and I think he'll be the first to tell you, he has not been able to do his job the best way that he would like to. But I still like to hold out hope that he is going to be a good head coach. I think this year has been really, really tough, obviously, for a lot of reasons. And when you don't have a strong quarterback, that's a big part of it. But I'd like to see what I still think we have not seen anything close to what Brian Callahan can do as a head coach. And I'd like for ownership to continue to give him a chance and support him, surround him with better players, better offensive line, and make another fresh start before we start putting too much blame on him. So I'd like to think that even though this felt like a very much big step back, you got to look at history with NFL first-year head coaches. Look at Dan Campbell's first year with the Lions. He finished 3-13, and guess what? Their last game of the season, they knocked out the Packers and kept them from the playoffs. So I'd like to see this team finish strong in these last 3 final games, somewhat of a little bit of hope going into next season, because I don't think we've seen anything close to what Brian Callahan can do. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks so much, Jill. Be sure to catch her on Fox 17.
He shoots, and he scores!
Thanks again to Jill Jelnick for coming on to the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast for us. Blaine Keller, Terry McCormick, Chris Yao joining you for the last segment of our show, starting with the stock report, and I'll give a closing thought, at least on my end, on Will Levis here, as his stock is plummeting and crashing. That was a necessary move to bench him on Sunday, right? Because if he stays in the game, there are really 2 schools of thought, right? You either bench him and either reset or let him sit out the rest of the year, or you let him work through it as a second-year quarterback. I think Brian Callahan had to sit. He was forced to sit Will Levis because of maybe trying to keep the camaraderie or the togetherness, whatever is left of it, of this team. You look at a guy like Jerome Baker, who came onto this team, played bad for a couple of weeks, was a healthy scratch on Sunday. How does Jerome Baker feel if Will Levis goes out and has 4 turnovers and then gets to continue to be the starting quarterback? Do you think there's any stock in that to have maybe a guy benched so that you can keep the locker room at least a little bit together in these last 3 games?
Sure, I put some merit into that because Brian said it yesterday in his post-game press conference, though, that felt the team needed a spark, and had to do what was best to try and, give them a chance to win this game. And it was obvious that the way Levis was, in a downward spiral, he was not giving them their best chance to come back and have a shot to win this game. So absolutely, it was the thing to do. And because it's so late in the season, you could bench him for a couple of games and then go back to him the way the Panthers have done with Bryce Young, or the Colts have done with Anthony Richardson. Both of those guys have had a little bit better success since they've come back. But it's so late in the year, I don't know that you can do that now. You're either just going to have to make the decision to roll with Levis these final 3 weeks and let the chips fall where they may, or you say the experiment's over and you go with Mason Rudolph for these last 3 games.
Where's your stock up?
Well, I just real quick on that. That's kind of what I was, I had mentioned in the chat during Jill's segment. She said that, you want to make sure that you know what you have in Will Levis. I think we know what we have, at least in Tennessee. I'm not sure you don't play Mason Rudolph just to see if he's not the guy that you stick with in 2025. I know he's a free agent, as you said, Terry, but I mean, not like folks have been knocking down the door to sign Mason Rudolph. And this is a guy that Brian Callahan actually went out and wanted. It's a guy he went out and signed after he became coach. So I think that may play into it too. I would be really curious to see how that's going to play out. I would love to see Rudolph just play the last 3 games as the starter and Will Levis not having been hurt to get him there.
Yeah, so anyway, this is interesting. Chris, you're in the boat of having Mason Rudolph start these last 3 games. Jill's in the boat of having Will Levis start these last 3 games. Terry, you're the deciding vote here. Where do you lie on this?
Well, I think right now, team morale would suggest you go to Mason Rudolph and see what he's got. But the season is completely lost. And the flip side of that to me is this. One of the things Callahan said yesterday was that a quarterback has to be able to dig himself out of the messes, for lack of a better term. I don't think that's the terminology he used, but that's what he insinuated, that you have to be able to dig yourself out of it. That's what we've not seen from Levis. So if you completely pull the plug on it, you're not going to get a chance for him to figure out how that's done. He's going to figure it out for the next team that he plays for if he figures it out. So for that reason alone, I would probably stick with Levis for these last 3 games and then do some serious assessment of the quarterback position in the offseason.
Give a stock down quickly here to J.C. Latham. Had 2 false start penalties and a hold on that offensive line yesterday. And like we talked about with Jill, give a stock up to Tavondre Sweat. His first forced fumble and fumble recovery in that game against the Bengals, and he had a 32-yard return. According to stats from True Media, I don't know if you guys saw this online yesterday. It's the longest fumble return by a player Sweat size, 330 pounds or more, since Halati. Let me get this right. Halati Nagata. Yeah, I mean, years and years and years ago. I mean, and even then, that was a 28-yard return. So this is a historic fumble return. Deserves a stock up for Tavondre Sweat.
Yeah, I'm going to give a stock down to the entire defense for allowing, even though they got 4 takeaways. In fact, they got 2 interceptions and a fumble out of Joe Burrow, who hadn't turned the ball over much at all. So Burrow had nearly as many turnovers as Levis. Of course, he had 3 touchdown passes to offset it. But they allowed 10 of 13 third down conversions. That's insane. You can't win any games doing that. And then I'll give a quick stock up to this. Been talking about the red zone being a problem against Jacksonville. 4 out of 4 yesterday, baby.
Progress. Chris, take us into our stat stuffers.
That reminds me of they gained a yard from Little Giants anyway.
I brought it up briefly at the jump. The number 10 turnovers yesterday by the Titans and the Bengals. 2 in one sequence That was by far one of the craziest plays of at least the weekend, with Tony Pollard fumbling and Jordan Battle returning it all the way to the 1 yard line before losing control of the ball and having it roll out of the end zone. It's the most since 2007 in an NFL game, combined turnovers. The Titans' 6 turnovers were their most since a snowy day in Cleveland in 2000, when they won with 7. I had to refresh Terry's memory on that game a little bit once I was trying to figure out the last time the Titans had at least 6 in a game.
Well. It was snowing like crazy. I think Brad Hopkins wisely got himself ejected from that game in the first quarter, so he wouldn't have to stand out there in the cold and the snow.
Genius.
Oh. As long as we're talking about stats, I'll give you one that I think I either stole it from Nick Suss or Teron Davenport, because we were talking about it in the media room one day last week. But with one more loss, the Titans would have 12 losses. They had 10 losses in 22, had 11 losses last year, had 12. I think this will be the first time in franchise history with one more loss that they will have increasing numbers of losses in 3 straight years. Not good.
How about give a little bit of love here? A couple of positive stats. Tight ends. Since Mason Rudolph came in, of course, Chigakonkwo was targeted a little bit in the early portion of this game. But as soon as Mason Rudolph came in, it was really to the benefit of the tight ends and the running backs in the passing game. Titans tight ends were targeted 16 times yesterday for 14 catches, 103 yards, and a touchdown. They had 38 passes, and 16 of them went to tight ends yesterday. A good bulk of them also went to Tajay Spears, who might have played his best game as a second-year pro. He had 87 receiving yards and 2 total touchdowns, one of them kind of being a garbage time score. But there are some younger pieces in both of those position groups that maybe point toward some positives as you go into the offseason, seeing some younger players maybe showing a little bit of improvement. Am I grasping for straws here, guys?
You are, but that's okay.
Probably. Yeah. But some of that was in garbage time. But I think that's a product also of what you see with Mason Rudolph. He's a veteran quarterback who's going to be more apt to take the check downs and the short, soft throws, not make as many of the deep throws that Levis likes to make. I think that's more of a product of his way of operating the offense. And probably if he is the quarterback over these next 3 games, that's probably more of what you'll see out of this offense. I would think the shorter stuff, the tight ends, the backs more involved.
Yeah, and I think that's what Brian Callahan ultimately wants. I mean, that's the style of offense he wants to play. And so Will Levis never fit this offense in general, so there's neither here, there, or there. One stat I will throw at you via Mike Herndon. In 22 and 23, the Titans had 8 losses by 10 or more points in 34 games. In 2024, the Titans have lost 7 times by 10 or more in just 14 games.
Wow.
That's absurd.
That is not progress.
No, that is not progress at all. So there you go.
Closing thoughts here, guys. Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Let me ask you guys this. How long a grace period do Brian Callahan and Ran Carthon get? I realize they get this season, and they can push the blame on Levis and the holes that are in the roster that they inherited. But how long before it's on them to fix it?
They get next year.
I'm not sure if they get all of next year.
Well, I mean, they get the opportunity to fix it next year. If they don't by week 10, probably done.
Titans have 3 games left in this regular season. I think as media, we're looking forward to the draft, though, in the off season. More division games coming up, though. Stay tuned to our coverage on Titan Insider. We'll see you back here, the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast. Thanks for joining.